So today I'll be talking about the power of having a speak up culture, having environments where employees' voice is welcome, and it's really good for business.
Wow.
What? Okay. Red light means we're on. And we're live. We're live. We're live. We're here.
We're here. We're live.
Live from our basements. Hello, LinkedIn universe. So good to have so many of you here. Hello, everyone. Steven Shadletsky here. Delighted to be with you again.
And we are live, and we are here, and delighted to be here with Tiffani Bova. Now just announced second time Wall Street Journal bestselling author, this time of the experience mindset. So hello all, please hop into the comments. Let us know where you're joining us from, because this is going to be a very interactive chat. How are you doing, Tiffani?
Hi, Shed. I'm thrilled to be here. Looking so forward to this conversation.
Nice. It's going to be fun. The thing that attracts me so much to your work is that it's inside out. I think so many organizations and leaders and authors look at customer experience only from the lens of customer without realizing that the very people who are helping your customers are employees. And so I love that you go, well, first and foremost, before we can talk about customers, let's talk about what's going on the inside. So would just love to hear more about that. Would love to hear about this new book you have out, and love to see everyone hopping into the chat and saying hello here.
Well, I'm joining from Los Angeles, California. So, I'll participate on where everybody's joining from. So I'd say this. I appreciate the compliment, but I did the same thing. Like my first book, Growth IQ, was 10 Paths to Growth. The very first path of that book was customer experience, right? True north, center of the universe, live and die for your customer. It's all about the customer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And, that was a 60,000 word book. And I think I mentioned employee like 5 times, So I would say that while painfully obvious, as you just described it, Shed, I missed it as well. And it's not that I missed it, although yes, it was that I never had a line of sight for it. Meaning, I am not a people expert. I'm also not a culture expert. Like that isn't my lane. My lane was really growth around things like sales, marketing, customer success, using technology in new ways, et cetera. But I would say, I wrote Growth IQ kind of the beginning of my tenure of being here at Salesforce. Now I've written the experience mindset, 6 years into being at Salesforce. And I would say now I have a front row seat to the power of people and culture on a company's ability to innovate and grow. And so that really flipped my own personal mindset. And then I made a comment. I didn't think it was a coincidence. Salesforce is a great place to work globally. It's one of the most innovative companies, and it's the fastest growing enterprise software company in the world. I think it's 3rd or 4th largest software company now at this point. I didn't think it was a coincidence. So I went to our CMO at the time and I said, I don't think this is a coincidence, but I think it's fascinating. Maybe we could prove it, because I went out and looked, in my analyst brain of being a former research fellow at Gartner, I went out and looked for the answer to that, and I couldn't find it. I couldn't find, people would say companies that do CX well see this kind of growth. Companies that do EX well see this kind of growth, employee experience. But I didn't see the connection between the two and that intersection of when an employee touches a customer. So I knew there was an opportunity for me to dig deeper.
Nice. But the thing that I typically say, and I want to see how this lands with you, is typically the more senior one gets in an organization, typically the further away you are from the customer. And for anyone who says, yeah, but who's wining and dining them and taking them out for dinners? It's like, well, dinner with other senior folks isn't the same as the people who are doing the work. And so I think it's so important for those, as we get more senior, to realize that those more junior to us in the organization are the ones touching the end user and the customer more. Is that your same experience? And how, as you become more senior, do you continue to make that connection between EX and CX?
Yeah, I will tell you that it was my CEO I worked for all the way back in 2002. And he said something to me that has always stuck with me. It's like, look, when you're an individual contributor, you kind of care about today. Like, what am I doing right now?
Yeah.
Like, easy, hard, joyful, not joyful, love it, hate it, right? What am I doing right now? And then you might move to a team lead. Okay, well, now you're thinking today, but you're thinking today for multiple people. And then you might go to, a director. Okay, now you're thinking, today for a team, but you may be thinking about this week, maybe even this month. Senior director, let's say now you're thinking about the quarter. You get to a VP, now you may be thinking about 2 quarters. Senior VP, let's say you think about the year, right? EVP, okay, now you might think 1 to 2 years. And you get to the C level, it's sort of, 2 to 5, 3 to 5 is where your focus is. So similar thing, right? But with each one of those sort of pivots, and I'm not saying that's a hard, fast rule. If you're the CEO of a small business, you're thinking about day to day. So I want to caveat that that's probably in a larger organization as you move up. You get further and further away. Okay.
Yeah.
But if you, and when he said that to me, I was like, interesting, right? Because I went from that sort of team quarter to, out to a year to out to 2 years fairly quickly. And so I didn't get a chance to sort of reorient myself from a leadership and management standpoint, but for another day. But I would say that I agree. I think as that sort of lens and purview of what you're responsible for gets longer and broader, wider, right? And deeper, it's only deep at the sort of execution layer, not the tactic layer. And you get you get a report every week to say the health of the business, green, red, yellow kind of a thing, but it's not telling you what's going on. And so we definitely have started to see, and through the work that I did on the experience mindset, we saw more and more CEOs sort of get out of their office. And when I say more and more, like, I don't mean thousands, get out of their office and go, meet with the employees. And I say, if you don't think there's any value in that, just watch all the reruns of Undercover Boss. And if you're listening in the US, because that is a masterclass in how disconnected leaders can get from the day to day, because the shock and awe about how completely confused they are about what's going on in their own business is priceless, right? And so that just shows that we really have to get better at managing by wandering around, which is very Tom Peters in Search of Excellence. That is still relevant today, and that book was written in 1982.
Yep. And for those watching who don't know Undercover Boss, it's a TV show that proves the point that, oh, no way, I didn't know that my employees are being treated so poorly. It's literally CEOs disguising CEO of 1-800-GOT-JUNK or Pizza Hut or whatever, going to the front lines and seeing what their employees' day-to-day is like.
I always say, like, it's such a waste of very expensive television to put a disguise on that CEO, because no one would recognize them anyway, because they never leave their office. Because if they left their office, they wouldn't have been so surprised. Right.
Yeah, fair. So we have a global audience here. We do have Thomas Capone, who I believe is in the tri-state area. Thomas, good to see you here. Mark Gilbraith is here from Sun Valley, Idaho. We have East London in the LinkedIn house here. Dr. Thomas, great that you're here as well. And thank you, Alejandro, for dropping in the link to Undercover Boss if we needed more entertainment. So, Tiffani, I'm sure you've only done this about 72 times in the last 72 hours, but tell us about Experience Mindset. Tell us about the process of, I think there's something here, and really the thesis and what you're trying to drive with this book.
Yeah, it like I said, at the beginning, it was this hypothesis of, there was no shortage of executives saying happy employees leads to happy customers. It's kind of obvious. And if you get those two things right, you're going to grow also. So when we did the first round of research, it was US based, and it was publicly traded companies. And it was kind of a short burst to just sort of see, was there any there? So we looked at publicly traded companies' available information around things like net promoter scores, what their customer satisfaction scores, what their Glassdoor ratings were, if there was anything, growth rates, obviously, attrition of customers, even, retention of employees, like anything we could get our hands on. And we worked with Forbes Insight on pulling that together. And what we found was, we saw that companies that did really well in customer experience, or CX, saw a lift in employee KPIs. And I think it was like 1.3 times. When we saw companies that were really good on employee experience, or EX, we saw a lift in customer experience or CX KPIs. And I think it was like, 1.4. Similar. So when we saw companies that did both right, and we did it on a 2x2, the quadrant, the right quadrant, right, is doing both well. We saw a 1.8 times faster growth rate, and on the CAGR side of things, so the compounded annual growth rate. So for a $1 billion brand, it was a $40 million impact. And you may be like listening to this going, I'm a $2 million brand or a $100 million brand. You could do the math on it, right? Just sort of 1.8x the growth rate. Now, the growth rate in that right was like in the mid 8% range for CAGR. And in the bottom left, like doing one right and one not so good was still in the 4% range. So I'm not saying that if you don't do both right, you're just not going to grow and wheels are going to fall off. Like that's not going to happen. But you get this multiplier acceleration flywheel effect if you get those both right. So we had this sort of a second assumption that there was this flywheel effect, that if you get one right, the other enjoys the benefit, and then both start, working in unison and in harmony, and you get that multiplier of 1.8x. So it was interesting enough to do a second study. And this one, we went out globally. We did it with Edelman, that does the Edelman Trust Barometer. And what we found there was we uncovered what were the attributes of an employee experience that had the greatest impact on customer experience. Look, I said, I'm not a people expert, right? So this does not cover DE&I, comp, those things that are very, very important on the employee side. It's just at that moment that matters when an employee touches a customer. It could be a human interaction, or it could be a user interface for an app, or a packaging of a product, or the design of a product, right? It's because a human is doing that, and then another human is experiencing it, if you will. Consuming, right? So when we did that, now all of a sudden we had something very tangible that we could go and say, look, here are the areas within the employee experience that you can then see and show measurable impact to customer. So things like seamless technology. I'll just sit there for a second. What we found that seamless tech was actually the largest disconnect between what the C-suite believed was happening in the business and what employees actually were experiencing. So 52% of the C-suite, so 52% of executives believed the technology that they were using was effective and efficient. 52%. Okay, which means 48% are like, we believe it isn't, which for another day, right? Only 32% of employees agreed. So that's the general employee base. Okay. So we already immediately have a 20% gap between what the C-suite thinks and what general employees think. The killer was only 20% of customer-facing employees believe the technology they're using allows them to collaborate more effectively and efficiently, do their work in a more productive way. So those that, by the way, as we've said a few times, are actually interacting with customers are the least satisfied with the technology they're being given. And so if we just sat there, I mean, that could have been a whole book in and of itself, right? I mean, that I think is one area where the executive team it's more obvious of why that's happening. They're not using the technology that the frontline employee is using. They're not in the problems, right? Right.
Totally. This is great. And as you have comments and questions in our conversation here with Tiffani, please hop into the chat and put them in. We will definitely highlight those. As you went through multiple studies, you went through, taking both the studies and all these ideas and getting it onto paper. What for you was the biggest surprise? And what for you, and maybe that's a case or a stat or something, and what for you was the biggest no duh? Like you knew it intuitively and the work showed it. So biggest surprise going through and biggest obvious.
Yeah. So when I started first sharing this with executives around the globe, it was sort of the tail end of lockdown, sort of in the US, because obviously parts of the world started opening back up at different times. But so most of those conversations during this heavy research phase was virtual. And so I probably did 100 of those roundtables. And, on those roundtables was human resource officers, heads of HR, heads of IT, CIOs, IT managers, heads of marketing, chief marketing officers or CMOs, and then obviously CEOs or leaders of a division. I didn't have a lot of CFOs. On those roundtables. And the first thing I heard pretty consistently is, if it's so obvious, why isn't everyone doing it?
Mm-hmm.
So I was surprised that people were like, it's really obvious. And then I would secondarily, on this other side of the exact same coin, is, then why isn't everyone doing it? Which was like, why aren't we doing it? If it's so obvious, like, why aren't we doing it? Or I think we're doing a really good job. Like, we're one of those 15% of companies or 10% of companies or 7% of companies, right, that are doing it really well. And I'm like, great. And then I start asking some questions, and very quickly we realize that maybe they have a better sense of, of what they think they're doing than what the reality is that's happening.
And by doing it, do you mean both a focus on customer experience and employee experience? Is that what you mean by doing it? Yeah.
Yes. And we would very quickly. So if I double click under that question, right, I could quickly find out and say, tell me the top 3 to 5 key performance metrics or KPIs that you track for customer experience. And they would rattle them off very quickly. And then I'd say, okay, are any or all of those metrics tied to your compensation as an executive, right? Because remember, this is HR, CMO, IT, some would say yes, some would say no. Then I'd say, okay, tell me what you have for employee. Like, what are your top metrics for employee? And they might be, and if it wasn't the HR leader, right, they might be a little more, they'd say, well, attrition is big for us, employee satisfaction, and then they'd be like, I'm not sure if there's any others, but I'm sure my HR person might know, right? And then I'd say, okay, is it tied to your performance? Right. And they may say, well, attrition is, because we want to make sure we don't have that, but not much more than that, where there may be 2 or 3 on the customer side. And so you start to see that there is this hyper focus, which I'm not saying is incorrect. I want you to hear it for me, right? I'm not saying customer first, employee second, and I want you to make it employee first and customer second. That is not my message. My message is that if you are going to make a decision to do something to reduce the effort for a customer, make sure you understand what the intended or unintended consequence is for your employees. So, over the last 23 years, we've spent billions of dollars reducing the effort for customer online to make it very easy to order. In 2001, I was designing commerce websites, literally 2001. It might be 6 or 8 clicks because we had to sort of do it that way because technology hadn't sort of evolved to allow us to do 1 click and now even voice. But we've spent that 23 years, right, really driving towards less effort for customer, for more, a better experience for them. Mm-hmm. But the consequence of that was what I was just saying, right? That the employees are overwhelmed now. The effort for them went up and their experience went down. And if you go, well, I don't believe that, or tell me more, like give me an example, we would never ask our customers to have 5 tabs open and bounce between multiple tabs to place an order with us. Yet we ask our employees every single day to bounce between 5, 10, 15 tabs, get up from their desk, go get something manually done. Nope, you don't have the ability to approve this. You have to go get that approval because it's above your whatever. You have to bounce around. It's going to take you 20 minutes to do that return for the customer. Yet in the customer's world, it's a 1-click return. And then you're running around in the background making that return happen across 20 minutes. We would never push that back to our customer because those expectations are long gone, right? I mean, they're so high right now. So, that's just that first one of, if it's so obvious, or they'd say, we're clearly not doing this. But the second one was nobody owns employee experience. We have an entire team that owns customer experience, but we have HR that owns employee, and HR owns pieces and parts of the employee experience. But what I just described about having 5 tabs open and it taking 20 minutes to do a return, HR has no influence on that. You know what I mean? Like it is not them. So those kinds of the tactical mechanics behind what we found, when you start to ask the executives these questions, you watch them sort of, their minds start to spin, and they either don't know the answer, which that's okay. They know the answer, but they never tied the two together. Or they get very hung up on what's the ROI, because we've made the muscle of the customer experience investment muscle of doing that ROI pretty strong at this point, where we don't have that same muscle strength on the EX side.
Yeah. So we have a couple great questions that have come in before I get to that. So,
Yes.
For you, is there a priority over CX or EX, or it is a both and?
Yeah, that's why I call it a mindset. Great question, Shed, because I just want all of you listening, if you're a leader or an individual contributor, when someone comes to you and says, look, we have to fix this for the customer, right? Because our tagline is, we are the easiest to do business with. We're the best customer service in our industry. We are the most customer, centric company on the planet, right? And you can, if you know who that is, starts with an A, out of Seattle.
Yeah.
But then you'll
rhymes
say,
with the jungle.
yeah. So if you look at that, how happy are many of their employees? So just because you're growing fast and just because you have strong CX does not mean you have a happy employee base. So this is just that pause. If we do this for one, what's the impact to the other? And are we setting our people up, meaning employees? And when I say sort of that stakeholder internal, it could be partners, vendors, your suppliers, your delivery drivers, right? They may not be your full-time employees, but they are an extension of your brand. That experience still influences what kind of experience your customers have. So it is really about this mindset of balancing the two. It'll never be 50-50. But right now it's so over pivoted to customer. And that's why we see the great resignation, quiet quitting. I saw one of the comments, this phenomenon of hybrid and distributed work, right? Employees are grumbling about things because they're just not happy. And that, if they're grumbling about it, and then they take a customer service call or a sales call, or they're doing a consulting project with a customer, how engaged are they going to be in that connection and moment that matters with the customer? Not very.
And will anyone actually be there to pick up the phone? Right.
Or that.
Right.
Or
You
that.
still need people in place. So there are,
Right.
we have a couple great comments here, I think, in reference to said company that
Right.
starts with A from Mark.
But I will tell you, so let's dig into this. So let's not bring up the RTO, right? Let's just hold that aside for just a second. That if there was a survey in that employee base, and really the disgruntled employees were in the warehouse and delivery, let's just stay with me, okay? The size of the organization, it might have peanut buttered the satisfaction to show like, oh, well, it's not that bad. We're at a 4.2, or we're at a, 4.0 on a scale of 1 to 5, whatever that is. But the mistake there is that should you survey teams, groups, locations, under a particular manager, or at a distribution facility, or drivers independently, right? Or the warehouse staff independently, you might start to see it's a 1 and it's 5s or 4.5s. And the blend makes you get this false sense of we're doing a really good job. So, and I'm not saying that was what happened in that case. I'm just giving that as an example. We definitely saw that through the research, where people feel like, well, we have a 4.2 on employee satisfaction. And I'll go, great, let's break out teams and tell me what it is. And they couldn't always answer those things. Right. And so some of it is really being better at deconstructing what's happening in the business.
Yeah, I have a mighty team of 2, and one of my next social media posts will be the 2 of us on screen, both with our thumbs up, saying these are the results of our recent employee engagement survey, right? But it's still, but the example of it is, now we're a company of 2, but if you have a company of 2,000, if you have this many thumbs up or whatever it might be, it's still meaningful to go into the data, to your point, by department, by team, by manager or leader, by geographical area, by function. Like, that's where some of the data becomes meaningful, rather than, to your point, we got 4.2, which by the way means that, well, at least 0.8.
Well, I will say, you asked me what was surprising.
Yes.
Okay. So the majority of organizations survey employees. Pre-pandemic, let's call it once a year. during the pandemic, like just for us at Salesforce, it was twice a year. It was monthly. And there was connection points with our entire executive team, including our board of directors, by the way, on an all hands calls weekly. So that hasn't maintained, obviously. When we came out the other side of it, it went down to monthly. Then now it's back down to quarterly. But I would say that the majority of organizations are surveying employees. Fair?
Yep.
However, this was one of those stats. The majority of them do nothing with the data. So what that does is you ask me 32 questions. I answer the 32 questions. The results are whatever they are, and then nothing happens. So then the next time you ask me 32 questions, I'm less likely to respond, or I might just click yes to everything and move on, right? Or no to everything and move on. So that was one where I went, oof, right? And so I would ask, well, why not? Well, it goes back to that comment I made, which was another one, right? Nobody owns it. If nobody owns it, no one's digging into this and sort of asking those questions. So if you're doing Net Promoter Score or NPS, are you doing eNPS or Employee Net Promoter Score? But the problem with that for me is it's not like, would you refer this place to work? Like that doesn't help me tactically find where there's opportunity for improvement. So let's go back to that, doing the return and it taking 20 minutes. Now you see Tiffani just finished doing the return in the call center in, wherever, Toronto, Seattle, Los Angeles, wherever it might be, and just pop up really quickly. I just saw the ticket close pop up. How easy was it for you on a scale of 1 to 5 to do that return? Now all of a sudden, and then that was a return one, right? Then it might be a refund. How easy was it for do that refund? Scale of 1 to 5. Now all of a sudden you can go
both for customer and employee potentially.
For both, let's say, sure. Yep. Because I guess now in many ways, they always do the customer, right? Because you get one. How great was your call? Or they'll say before the end of the call, hi, there's going to be a survey that comes to you. Would you please, I'd love it if you would say this was a great experience, right?
Yeah.
That. Okay.
There's always a backup career for you in vocals if you need. Yeah, you can be the voice of. Yeah.
Right. Or it will show up in your inbox, the next day or something like that. Right.
Yeah.
But I want you to do it to your employee. Now, all of a sudden, you're able to deconstruct what we were talking about. Right? Instead of peanut buttering satisfaction, now I'm going to say, look, we don't have a problem on refunds. The call center says it's sort of, between a 4 and a 5. I think we're good there, right? Thumbs up. But these returns, we got a pretty consistent 1. Let's go there. Now, you'd ask, whose responsibility is that? Is it HR? No. Is it IT? I don't know. Is it the call center manager? Probably. But the call center manager might not be able to fix that because then it touches technology, people, and process, which the call center leader or customer success leader doesn't have much sway and influence. So that's why I'm saying this is not a role. It has to be a mindset. And then, a best practice out of the findings was really creating kind of this employee advisory board, similar to what you have for the customer advisory board. So anything you do on the customer side, I want you to consider doing on the employee side. So you can find ways in which, like I said, you would never ask a customer to have 5 tabs open and do all this, but yet we do it to our employees every day. So you have to have a way by which you can toss an idea, right? Float the balloon and say, do you think this will work? And the employees will go, well, hold on. If we do that, don't forget about these things because they're in the business. The person designing that solution is not looking at what they have to do in their day-to-day. So journey map your customer experience on buying, journey map your employee experience on placing that order. So, that's really the net of the book.
Beautiful. And get into that flywheel where both feed the other.
Yes. Great.
A couple of great questions and comments have been coming in here. By the way, my favorite question in employee surveys is something to the effect on, based on your response last year, have you seen any meaningful change from the survey last year? And it's one of my favorite questions.
Well, I don't know. What did I say last year? I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I have no idea.
Right. But to your point, so both frequency, but then does the feedback do anything? Does it go anywhere and make any meaningful change?
Yeah. And when I say companies do nothing with it, and you're listening to this and you're like, look, I don't sit in the C-suite. I'm a middle manager or a first-time manager, and these things all sound great, but there's no way I could effectuate change. It's just out of my control. If you are a first-time manager or a small team manager, you could affect change in your own team. Ask them this one question, whatever that process pain in the, what is, right? Like, what gets in? I mean, how many managers say to you, my role, my job, right, is to remove the obstacles in your way for being successful? Okay, well, let's remove some obstacles. So, like, this process is broken. So, as managers, we have to ask, if there's one thing I could change in your day-to-day to give you time back, what would it be?
Yeah.
If there's one thing I could do day-to-day to make you more productive, if there's one thing day-to-day I could help you be more satisfied with your role, whatever that is, start with one and then compile it from your team and go, okay, my team, pretty collectively, the number one thing was this. And then as a leader, right, start working up and going, look, if I can fix these three things, my team thinks it'll save them an hour a day. You're asking me to be more productive. I can't get more than 100% out of my team. So in the same amount of time, if I could spend another hour doing what you've hired my people to do, wouldn't you want to do that? And then if it works, wouldn't you want to roll it out to the other 100 teams? Because then, oh my gosh, you're saving weeks of work in a day when you add it all up in a company of 2,000 people or whatever the number is. So don't, I hope that you don't hear this and go, it's too, high up in the, in the acronym chart, for me to do, because each of us individually. Now, if you're an individual contributor, then you need to find those ways in which I think I could get time back if these three things were fixed. Now go to your manager, regardless of whether they're asking or not, and just say, look, I think this is where we could do it. I talked to the 3 or 4 other people on my team, right? And we all agreed this was it. And so bring it from the bottom up. This kind of shift internally will only happen if the bottom is engaged, right? Is the individual contributors understand and make a decision and are willing to change. If that doesn't happen, it doesn't matter how many times the executive tells the people, right, why they need to do something. If they don't go, okay, I get it, I'm in, it just doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, now we're touching into some speak up culture stuff, which we'll speak about in a few months. A great comment here from Tina. Well, not so great. This is a nice example of gaslighting. Been with companies who took the survey as an opportunity to rationalize and tell employees why they are wrong about how they feel. Not a great way to improve EX or CX.
Okay, so let's play that out. So thank you, Tina, for the comment. Let's play that out. Would a company ever send a message to a customer and tell them why they're wrong?
Some would, and it usually doesn't go well.
They wouldn't do it for long.
No.
And if they, do something like that to customers, especially now in the age of social media, we have seen how quickly things can turn. So, it is an opportunity that is, so for those of you familiar with the acronym PPT, right? It's People, Process, and Technology. It was created, Leavitt's Diamond back in the 60s. Of those three things, I actually added a fourth. So I've gone people, process, tech, and culture. So it's PPTC because people and culture are very different things. That comment that Tina made is a cultural problem, right? That it was okay to send a message out there and literally be like, it's your fault. You know what I mean? Like, where culturally it should be like, absolutely not. Like, we would never do that. Like, we need to show up and find out why our employees are feeling this way. And if we think they're wrong, we've got to figure out how to tell them, explain to them, share with them, get them to come along on this journey with us. So maybe we're not doing something correctly, that the result of our mistakes is this bad behavior. Like, pick Wells Fargo, which was in my first book, it was just fraught with fraud at the individual contributor layer. That doesn't happen unless culturally it's okay. And one of the stories in the experience mindset was Volkswagen, that when you have a culture that was driving towards productivity at the expense of all else, people cut corners, individual cut corners, they hid numbers, they lied on things, and then boom, right? The largest emissions scandal in the history of, automotive. So, culture and people are two different things. So I wanted to pull culture into it. And I also think that people, process, and technology is so significantly different than it was in the 60s, right? I mean, look at the last 6 months with GPT, very different. So we are moving at such a fast pace that was a framework in my brain and my way to really sort of deconstruct all of these things coming at us so that it was doable, right? It doesn't become overwhelming to people I'm trying to share the concept with.
Nice. And I love this, Tiffani, that you've highlighted. It is not one ahead of the other, but just consider it as a mindset that if you're doing it for customers, maybe you should consider the ramifications in doing it for employees as well, and vice versa.
Yeah, and I wasn't there
love that.
originally. Like I was having a conversation with Liz Wiseman, who wrote Multipliers, and I was sort of sharing the research with her, and I go, I'm kind of thinking of this and that. So she just started asking me questions, right? And in amazing Liz Wiseman intelligence, very quickly, I said, no, Liz, that's not what I'm saying. It's really about, I want them to have this kind of experience mindset. And I went, stop, like title of the book, you know what I mean? Like, so, she goes, look, if you try to put one over the other and say one's first, one's second, it becomes a land grab. It's a power play. It's a head count, resource, budget, fight for the fiefdom of I'm going to hold this in. It's the silo mentality of this is my focus. I'm responsible. The rest of you have no opinion kind of a thing. Yeah. Versus that's why I'm not advocating for a role, right? That it needs to be something that permeates the culture so that when you're sitting in a meeting and someone says, I think we should do this, that someone at the table goes, great. What's the benefit, effort, right? Impact to customer, employee, our shareholders, our partners, all of those things, so that you have a really full picture of, are we just satisfying the ever increasing demands of our customers, external customers, at the expense of our most important asset in our people when we are trying to build resilient, innovative, responsive, and customer-centric organizations? You cannot do it without the people.
Yep. Yeah. We have a great, I do want to get and highlight some of these questions and comments coming through. One thing I want to run by you is I've put in my book that it is not people first or customers first. It isn't employees or customers first. They all happen to be people typically, but I say values first. And your values allow you to figure out who are your people based on their behavior, which means you can fire a customer if they behave outside of your values. You can also have an intervention with an employee, which could lead to them being offered to the competition if they behave in a way that are outside of the value set. So I like to put forth, when it comes to culture, values and the behaviors of those values first.
Absolutely. And so I'm going to go back to what you asked me at the very beginning, right? Me having a front row seat at a company like Salesforce that is absolutely known for its core values, from the top, from day one to, 75,000 employees to now somewhere in the low 60s, 1,000 employees, that we live and breathe that cultural value approach. And that's why we're so highly effective. Now, it's one of the stories in the book, but in transparency, even being a great place to work, which I, said on that 2x2, you could be doing really well on customer, and really well on employee. So, customer success is one of our core values. Trust is one of our core values. If we're talking about these, we have 5. So those are 2 of them in this particular conversation. We have obviously a chief people officer. We only stood up an employee experience team 10 months ago or 11 months ago now, if I'm doing math correct. Maybe it's been a year. I forget when I finished writing. So yeah, maybe it's been about a year. So in 22 years, great place to work, highly innovative, fastest growing enterprise software company. We only stood up an employee experience team to, in the last year, to start to deconstruct the phases and parts and journey of an employee, from hire to onboarding to activation to, learning, to continuous learning, to career development, right? To the tools that are used, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And that is a cross-functional team, and that, spans across, although it sits in the people or part of the organization, because of what I was just saying, right? Not to pop it up as its own thing, but it was in the right place for our senior people leader to be the facilitator at the executive level to make sure that the employee experience team got what it needed to help improve the days and lives of our employees.
Nice. But for a company that's been that successful for that long, it's in the last year. So
right. And that's my comment. Yeah.
There is hope. Yeah. Okay. Mark asked this brilliant question a number of minutes ago. Let's tap into it. And you spoke a little bit about this, but any evidence in your research of a correlation between employee experience and the current phenomena of hybrid and distributed work?
Yeah, there wasn't any specific, like I could tag back and go, this is what we heard. When we looked at those attributes that were driving employee satisfaction and employee happiness and all of the things as it relates to customer, there are things that were in there about, look, do they treat me well? Do they listen to my feedback? So you could, I guess, infer that the feedback right now is I want to keep working from home, right? But if you go pre-pandemic, customer was the number one stakeholder for long-term success for companies, according to Edelman. Mm-hmm. In the middle of the pandemic, employee popped to number one for the first time in a decade. So that flip was the sort of disconnection of that power struggle, right? Between employer, employee. Employer may be like, oh, we've got, 2,500 employees, whatever the number is. And if they leave, we'll just hire someone else. Well, now we actually have an employee hoarding problem. I just read the other day that like people are hanging on to employees because talent is so hard to find and they know the company. And so rather reskill them and find a place to put them, even if, businesses slow down a little bit, if they can afford to do it, obviously. So I think that the, working from home, unfortunately, trust, which was one of the levers that we found driving this connection between employee and the company. If you're going to allow people to work from home and you trusted them when they worked in the office, and then you put sort of keystroke tracking software on their laptops and desktops, and you force them to leave their cameras on during, office hours so you could see that they were working, that doesn't engender trust. So I think the argument around productivity, the jury is still out, right? There's lots of evidence saying people are more productive, they're happier, they get 4 hours time back from commuting. Like there's a lot of benefit. And instead of sort of fighting that, how about fighting the 5 tabs they need to do their job or the 20 minutes to do, a return? Like, let's fight something that actually gives and has an impact to the day-to-day that they're working on. But I think the jury's still out. Do I think it will go back to always in the office? Do I think it will stay always at home? I don't think so. I think it will swing in the middle. I'm a firm believer by team, by region, right, by group, et cetera, that it may be like you have to come in 2 days a week or 1 week a month or 2 weeks a quarter. And we get together as a team. And that's where, because I do believe that there is a lot of value in that human relationship, collaboration, connection that is difficult to replicate virtually, not impossible, but it's just not the same. When I get to see my coworkers, I've worked from home for 17 years. So the pandemic didn't really change anything for me, except where my office is. This used to be where I park my car.
Yeah.
Now it's a studio.
And lack of travel for a time.
Yeah. But outside of that, from a where I work standpoint, it had no impact. When I get to see my colleagues, like I'm super excited. It's like we just chitter chatter and catch up and laugh and joke. And it makes our working relationship remotely even that much more strong. So I don't think it'll go back to 100%. It's based on company, region, segment, team size, criticality to business. I think that's where you have to really think team by team, having a flex agreement. And then as an employee, you sign that flex agreement. And if you're going to get hired into the team, this is the flex agreement. But as we saw from the company that was mentioned in Seattle, like they're like, no, you told us we could just stay working from home. So we made different decisions. Now you want us to come back. You've broken our trust. You've gone back on your word. I think that's also not fair because things change. Like, well, you always told me I was going to work in the office and now you tell me I can work from home. that's equally right. Like you told me I got hired to work here and now you want me to work from home. I don't have a home office. I don't have high-speed internet. I don't have any room in my house. Are you going to buy me a bigger house so I can have a room in my house for an office? I mean, no one was complaining when that flipped on its head, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think everyone needs to just sort of go, what's best for me and my family? And then companies, to your point, need to say what's best for us and the business. And if that is not in agreement, then people have to make different decisions.
Yep. Fair. Quick question from Dr. Thomas. Any sector better or worse off as it relates to EX and CX as you went through the experience mindset?
Yes. So highly transactional industries, let's just say like retail and hospitality, right? Like, you know, a restaurant waiter, waitress, bartender, cook, line cook, you know, cleaning crew, like that may be very transactional and transient. And so it's hard to build a culture when you have a lot of people that are part-time, new, only here 2 weeks, gone, didn't show up for the shift, whatever might happen. So we actually did we did 3 studies. The third study we commissioned through Stanford, Columbia, and a group called Talent Tech. They did some research into a retailer in the US, a little more than 1,000 storefronts. So there's only a handful of places. I don't know who it is, but whomever it was more than 1,000 storefronts because obviously it was a blind project that we did. And they found when even with part-time employee, full-time employee, the difference between tenured employees, like they've only been here 3 months, they've been here 3 years, the location of the store, the demographic of the employees, they looked at those kinds of things. They started to dial in on what aspects of that employee experience could have the greatest impact on them. So it was things like training. It was things like giving them the empowerment to actually do a return right there without getting approval. It was fixing process issues. It was working to make sure that, you know, there was great communication and leadership, really training management at the management layer, those kinds of things. So retailer in this case,
Yeah.
when they did those things, they saw a 50% increase in revenue per head, per hour, per store employee. Significant.
Yeah.
That gets people's attention, going back to the ROI. But it was retail. It was transient, you know, it was part-time, full-time. So you can't just go, well, we can get 50%. So we're very clear there. That one study, we could show causation. Very hard to prove causation everywhere. So we call it a direct correlation, right? Or we could see these levers had meaningful impact. But in that particular study, we could say causation because they isolated everything else. They made sure they did the study not during like the holidays or, back to school or whatever it was where you'd see a spike in sales anyway. Like they really tried to normalize and move all the noise away and just see if they could isolate those changes to see the returns. And they were able to do it.
Great. Neat. I know we're nearing on our time here, so last questions or comments if you have for Tiffani. My friend Frank, who's close to Chicago, asks a great question. Love the values first mindset. Question. What do you do when the highest ranking person who approved these values doesn't practice those values, aka the CHO, the Chief Hypocrisy Officer? I love that. Officer. Revolt. What say you, Tiffani? And I definitely have a point of view on this as well.
Well, now Dr. Nia is going to get really upset because now there's another acronym. We have a Chief Hypocrisy Officer.
Nice.
Yes. And we have seen that on full display, just the worst of it, right? The video clips of CEOs getting on a Zoom call and firing employees. And, 6 months earlier, it's, we care about you. We're here for you. What can we do for you? That very empathetic, quick pivot. And then, right when, especially for publicly traded companies, when the screws get tightened around things like profitability, right, and revenue and return on capital and all those things, it's ultimately where sort of the truth shows itself. And that, by the way, that one of the levers we found was alignment. So aligning around the values and C-suite alignment. But it was also accountability, C-suite accountability. Like you say you're going to do something, that you do it. And so those have impact on the employees because, to your point, right? Like geez, they're asking me to do this, and I see the executives doing that. Why am I doing this? Like, they're not doing it, so why am I doing it? And then you see someone get fired for doing it when the executives are doing it. And so it just puts a really bad taste in the mouth of the employees. And that gets, the result of that is sort of that quiet quitting, right? Like, I'm just going to collect a paycheck till I find something else, or I'm just going to keep my mouth shut, or I'm just going to let it roll off my back, like whatever. But if it's something ethical, if it's something around values, then people are making decisions differently when they're able, right, to leave the job and go find something else. If you're in a situation where you have to put food on the table and you have to suck it up and not leave, those are the situations where you just see that low employee satisfaction, right? And then you have burnout, and you have all the things around mental health as it relates to work. So that is a toxic environment that if the top doesn't get swapped out, will just continue to manifest itself internally. Yeah.
Yep. And yeah, I mean, you and I can never be in a position to say to someone, you should leave or you should quit, because we don't know what's going on for that
Correct.
person. But
Correct.
to your point, if that's the type of behavior that is happening, there's a large gap, a large say-do gap, then it's going to impact both EX and CX for sure. And you'll see more quiet quitting, and you'll see more resignation as well. So if you can, obviously feedback up, but when someone is in that position of authority, how much humility do they have to hear it and make a change? Very good. And hey, Dr. Thomas is learning with all these acronyms here. Thank you for that.
No, I learn all the
Tiffani,
time. I heard an acronym the other day and I went like, what is that? Like, so there's so many new ones. I can't keep up.
Yeah.
The one that is stacked, Dr. Nia, that I sort of went up the stack, that was sort of, vice president, senior vice president, executive vice president. And then I said CEO. Yep.
One of the fun things that I do when I hear an acronym on a call or something that I don't understand and it's inappropriate to ask in that moment, I'll Google it, and then there's like 7 different options for what that acronym could be, and I just make my best guess. Tiffani, anything we didn't discuss or you wanted to mention before we say goodbye today? And you've been so generous with your time and what you've shared.
Listen, I appreciate the opportunity to join you on this show. Great questions. Thanks everybody for joining, and Shed for having me. I don't have any more connections left on LinkedIn, but you can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active. With a book, she's a little more than 2 weeks old. Here's what she looks like. That's what she looks like.
She looks pretty.
Yep. It's on Audible. It's on Kindle. Go pick up a copy if you're interested. But I'm always open to feedback. Let me know if there was something you absolutely did not agree with. Those are the really rich conversations. If you work for a company that's doing this really well, I'm always looking for new and great examples. So, look, this is about me learning as well. With each conversation, I sort of dig a little difference into the more deeply into the nuances of all this, because it is definitely not easy black and white. There are a lot of nuances in this research. And so it's a journey for all of us.
Beautiful. Well, Tiffani, it's such a joy for me. I've known you for quite a while now, and to have another conversation. And the fact that I think you and I come from different perspectives. I spend most of my time in people and culture, and you don't. And the fact that we can sort of come into this middle and have both a different conversation and yet the same conversation at the same time is really fantastic and heartening for me, which is great. So thank you again for joining. Congrats again on Wall Street Journal Bestseller for the second time. I hope all the hard work feels that it was worth it, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.